And welcome to Boom Bust, broadcasting around the world and covering the world of business and finance and the impact on us all. I'm Ben Swan, filling in for Bart Chilton in Washington. Glad you're with us. So coming up, after years of berating from Western powers, could China's Belt and Road Initiative face some competition? Hillary Fordwich, the CEO of Stromark, lends us a hand to sift through what could be a major move in international development. And speaking of China, the nation's auto sales seeing a major slump. So what's behind it? Lauren Fix, the car coach, takes us on a drive through this and several other major auto headlines from across the globe. Plus, the IMF and the World Bank are hosting their annual spring meetings in the nation's capital, and we are on the ground. RT correspondent Sarah Montes de Oca brings us the latest on the meeting from up close. All of that directly ahead. But first, let's do some headlines. And let's begin right here with another twist in the ongoing drama of the U.S.-China trade war. Data today shows that Chinese imports took a major slide in March, falling 7.6% when compared to last year. This major tumble comes on the tail of a dismal slide in February of 5.2%. Now, while these numbers are stark, the picture is even more grim when taking a look at the nation's imports from the United States. According to data, imports from the U.S., it fell 28%, while exports to America saw a 3.7% decline. Despite these otherwise troubling numbers from domestic consumption, exports from the People's Republic saw a surge last month, jumping by more than 14%. All of this news comes as the U.S.-China trade war is slowing to a crawl in contrast from previous months. In an apparent olive branch to reach a solid trade deal, China has offered up to open up its cloud computing sector to U.S. tech companies. That's according to the Wall Street Journal. Well, have you heard of a federal agency called OPIC? Not OPEC, OPIC. Most people have not, but OPIC, or the Overseas Private Investment Corporation, is a U.S. federal agency that connects private and American lenders with governments and developers in developing countries. OPIC and its counterparts in Canada and the EU, they have just signed a memorandum of understanding here in Washington. Now, according to a statement put out by OPIC, that memo of understanding will enhance cooperation, quote, to advance shared development objectives and underscore the participants' commitment to providing a robust alternative to unsustainable state-led models, end quote. What? So that's not very clear at all. Joining us now to help us explain and understand what OPIC is doing is Hillary Fordwich, the CEO of Stromark. Hillary, glad you're here.
Pleasure, Ben.
All right, let's translate that to begin with. What exactly does this agreement between OPIC and Canada and the EU essentially do at this point?
Okay, what it actually is in a nutshell, to make it clear, and you're right, it certainly isn't OPIC. What it is, it's really that it's to counter what is known really as the debt diplomacy from the Chinese. Debt diplomacy is this sort of China club that they're establishing around the world, and it means that smaller nations that are given a lot of these funding projects, a lot of infrastructure projects, Ben, afterwards they default on these loans and they default on the payback, and therefore they become indebted to China. Now, President Xi Jinping has obviously denied this is not the China club, but that is what's basically happening. And there have been complaints everywhere from countries like Pakistan, Sri Lanka, the former Ceylon, outside of India, the Maldives, Malaysia, and Myanmar.
So essentially, nobody's going to loan you money without strings being attached.
Of course.
And in this case, obviously, China's lending the money. You default on it. Now you owe China.
Exactly.
Right? And so what the U.S. essentially is doing is saying, don't owe China, owe us.
Yeah, countering that and giving another alternative. And actually an indication that how successful this project has been is that the budget has been raised from 30 billion to 60 billion, Ben. And yes, it's to counter what the Chinese are offering. A good example actually would be, for example, in Africa. The Chinese have extensive infrastructure projects in Africa. The African nations welcome this with open arms. But what a lot of people don't realize is that not only is most of the ore, global ore, resident in Africa and being mined from Africa by the Chinese, but importantly, iridium. So most of our viewers might say, well, what's iridium? Okay, iridium goes into every cell phone. Iridium is critical for the future of technology. The Chinese have a long-term plan here, and that's what this is about. Yes, it's countering what the Chinese are offering, which is very tempting to nations. But interesting, though, a nation that you really wouldn't expect and you wouldn't usually lump into that group of sort of poorer nations or more underdeveloped nations that have been susceptible to this is Italy. Italy has just signed on to the Chinese program. Well, that's a big threat, and that's a threat to Europe. Hence the EU, Canada, and the United States uniting under this recent agreement.
So essentially they would say, you know, again, don't owe the Chinese, owe us.
Exactly. But it's like two different banks. Really, it's like two different global banks, you could say.
That's essentially what it is.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think that's exactly what it is. But didn't the U.S. and the EU kind of mock the Chinese about this for a while? It was almost as if this China, it's called the what?
The Belt and...
Go ahead.
Yeah, the Belt and Road program.
Belt and Road program. That essentially that was like, it was seen as a kind of sloppy attempt to exert itself.
Well, and it was initially because it didn't seem serious. But China, of course, obviously has evolved.
Made it serious.
China has come leaps and bounds. And as somebody once said to me who was in China, with seeing all the cranes and everything going up there, it's basically organized capitalism. That's what it is. But it's organized centrally by the government. And yes, they're trying for global dominance. And this is one of the tactics.
And the U.S. has already done this in a similar deal also with Australia and Japan, correct?
Yes, and there aren't many projects that you can really sort of point to, and I think that's why the funding has been stepped up.
Okay. While we have you here, can we talk about Brexit?
I knew you were going to go there, Ben.
we have to go there, right? So we reported yesterday.
You want to talk about Halloween? Is that what you want to talk about?
Yes. We reported this yesterday that the EU
very serious,
extended that Brexit deadline to October 31st to Halloween, right? If no deal is made by May 23rd, then the UK would have to participate in the EU parliamentary elections. Correct. Which is what they were trying to avoid. Right. They've extended this out now. Do you expect to see a deal get done, or are we going to see come October 31st, you're going to be sitting there, I'm going to be sitting here, we're going to have the same conversation again about what's going on with Brexit and where is the next deadline?
I think that is a great likelihood. However, one thing I will say, a couple of differences, are that, of course, as you know, Theresa May has reached out to Jeremy Corbyn, the opposition leader of the Labour Party, because she's desperate to get a deal through. And I think when you get concessions that are basically conceding to what the Labour Party wants, there could be a deal that more people will vote for. That doesn't mean to say it's what the British public voted for, 17.4 million who voted for Brexit, but it would be a deal closer to the EU in the customs union, and there's more of a likelihood of that going through. The other reason, of course, why the EU has extended to Halloween, October 31st, is because they're hoping that there'll be another referendum. And as most people have predicted, due to the demographic shift since 2016, there's a greater likelihood of Brexit failing and Brexit being revoked if there was another referendum. That's what kind of the EU is banking on. Because remember, the greatest percentage of people voting for Brexit were actually elderly. Sadly, many of them have passed away now, plus a lot of voters that were too young to vote at that point, who would vote to remain, have come of age. And that's what this is about. And you think the demographics, or at least the MPs are hoping the demographics will have shifted enough in just 2 years? Those that want to remain. Those that want to remain would like another referendum for that reason. And also, there's also the sort of idea that many people weren't ready and didn't even think that Brexit would ever even happen or be voted for. And now Remainers have rallied and they would be out in force to vote. But just to be clear, you think that they will not make the deadline before the EU parliamentary elections? That will still have to go forward with the UK? I don't think so, unless there's an alignment with Labour, which may happen with Jeremy Corbyn. Hillary Fordwich, the CEO of Stromark. We hit a whole bunch of different subjects here, but we appreciate your time. Thank you. Pleasure, Ben. Well, Walt Disney stock is on the move up today, up more than 10%. In fact, that's a big jump with the announcement and more details being given about the new streaming service. It is called Disney Plus. It's a big deal. The stock hit an all-time high after the media conglomerate priced their new service at $6.99 per month. Disney Plus will launch on November 12th here in the U.S. It will feature content from many of the brands that the company has been acquiring over the last decade. The service will include content from Marvel, Star Wars, Pixar, and of course, legacy Disney properties. Following the acquisition of 20th Century Fox, all 30 seasons, by the way, of The Simpsons will now be available at launch, as well as programming from National Geographic. Again, a very, very good day for Disney. Shares of Netflix, they took a hit on Friday, sliding by 4% as their lowest tier streaming plan is still $2 more than Disney Plus. Well, time now for a quick break, but hang in there, because when we come back, the IMF and the World Bank, they are hosting their annual spring meeting in the nation's capital right here, and we are on the ground. RT correspondent Sarah Montes de Oca brings us the latest on the meeting from up close. And as we go to break, here are the numbers at the closing bell.
Я вижу себе ракете. Ну вот ты сидишь и не веришь, что это происходит. Вдруг ты понимаешь, что детская мечта, вот она реализуется.
Хотелось увидеть свой дом издалека. И ты это не узнаешь никак, не побывав там.
Тот человек, который туда полетит, а вдруг это буду я.
528 секунд, и ты в космосе. Я готовился по физкультуре, истории космонавтики, русскому языку.
Я тренируюсь каждый день.
Ощущение дома – это весь мир.
Мы давно уже отсеяли, ни разу не прикоснулся.
Я помню сам момент объявления результатов. Вот встал 1, 2, 3.
The rules of the game have to be changed, and we are still living with historical legacies of industrialization. Most of the, let's say, legal frameworks in Western world, all of them are designed for industrial phase of technology. And now we are moving ahead, and I think the problem is that our concepts are lagging behind.
And welcome back. JP Morgan Chase announced Friday that it posted record first quarter profit and revenue. The United States' largest bank profit rose by 5% to $9.18 billion or $2.65 per share in the first quarter. It outpaced estimates of $2.35 per share growth. JP's CEO, Jamie Dimon, issued a statement saying that the gains push back against those who worry of another recession. Quote, even amid some global geopolitical uncertainty, the U.S. economy continues to grow. Employment and wages are going up, inflation is moderate, financial markets are healthy, and consumer and business confidence remains strong. End quote. The bank's revenue rose by 5% to $29.9 billion, exceeding previous estimates of $1.5 billion. The institution said their income growth was due largely thanks to the impact of higher rates. Now, this has been illustrated by massive increase in their retail lending business, where profits rose 19% to $3.96 billion. The stock started trading up at 4.2% on the news, opening the door for the largest one-day increase in price since November of 2016. Well, the economy of Argentina is a big topic of discussion as the International Monetary Fund World Bank spring meetings kick off this week here in Washington, D.C. With presidential elections slated for late October in the South American nation, the IMF chairwoman, Christine Lagarde, advised presidential candidates against stepping away from recent economic reforms that she claims will create growth heading into 2020, saying, quote, now that so much hard work has been done in a program where social protection has always been one of our three key priorities, it would be foolish on the part of any candidate to turn their back to the work that is underway, end quote. The IMF estimates South America's second largest economy will contract by 1.2% this year, but will see growth in the second half of 2019, followed by a 2.2% increase in 2020. Lagarde has a stake in the fight as Argentina secured a $50 billion financing package from the IMF in June before securing an additional $6 billion after asking for more in October. The economy shrank by 3.5% in the third quarter of 2018, while poverty has risen to 32% in Argentina from 26% in years prior. And as we mentioned, the IMF is hosting their annual spring meeting right here in Washington, D.C. today, where a whole list of items will be up for discussion. For more on what we can expect from the IMF, we turn things over to RT correspondent Sarah Montes de Oca.
We're here just outside the International Monetary Fund in Washington, D.C., where meetings are underway and scheduled throughout the weekend. Now, on the agenda are some key economic issues, including global trade, digital currencies, and hot-button topics like Venezuela. In recent days, we've heard the IMF is highly concerned about the rising global debt in the corporate sector. Director of the IMF's Monetary and Capital Markets Department, Tobias Adrian, told CNBC, "We are particularly worried about the corporate sector, where leverage is rising, underwriting standards, and some pockets of the corporate sector are deteriorating." Now, private sector debt has risen in the aftermath of the 2008 financial crisis. This made borrowing grew steadily cheaper, and investing in this type of debt has provided investors with some higher returns compared to safer government debt.
Global growth lost momentum throughout 2018, falling to 2.7% in the fourth quarter, down from 3.3% in the first quarter, based on World Bank calculations. The deceleration was seen in both advanced and developing economies, and it coincided with three other warning signs: waning structural reforms in major economies, financial stress in some large emerging markets, and elevated policy uncertainty globally.
Now, they'll also be discussing cryptocurrencies, which the IMF said are shaking up the entire banking system. Now, head of the IMF, Christine Lagarde, warned that these innovations need much more regulation and scrutiny. We don't want innovation that would shake the system so much that we would lose the stability that is needed. Now, changing gears a little here, while the IMF prides itself on helping developing countries who are in need of large loans, it's important to note that back in February, the IMF reached a $4.2 billion deal with Ecuador. The South American country is already struggling with a large fiscal deficit and some pretty heavy foreign debt. Now, the country will also receive an additional $6 billion in loans from multilateral institutions. Now, this includes the World Bank, the Inter-American Development Bank, and the CAF Andean Development Bank. Now, critics have pointed to these deals as a potential factor in Ecuador's revoking Julian Assange's asylum just this week in London. And today's meeting, the IMF is also expected to address the crisis in Venezuela. Now, the heads of the IMF and the World Bank are now faced with the big challenge on whether or not to recognize the opposition leader and self-proclaimed President Juan Guaido as the country's legitimate leader. New head of the World Bank, David Malpass, told reporters Venezuela is of deep concern to them. Now, the World Bank will be deeply involved, and we are preparing for that. But the situation is still troublesome on the ground. Now, we'll be watching just to see how exactly these institutions may get involved and to what extent. Reporting for Boom Bust, Sarah Montes de Oca, RT.
American oil giant Chevron has inked a $33 billion deal to buy Anadarko Petroleum. The agreement will boost Chevron's natural gas and shale business. In announcing the acquisition, Chevron said it would issue 200 million new shares and use $8 billion in cash to make the purchase. They will also take on $15 billion in debt. The deal was one of the largest in the oil sector since the 2016 acquisition of BG Group by Shell for $50 billion. On the news, Anadarko's stock shot up to $65 per share, nearly 40% higher than Thursday's closing price. Chevron has made a name for themselves with 8,000 gas stations in the United States and 8 of their own refineries. Anadarko, on the other hand, has focused their business on production of crude oil and natural gas. They sell their product to other companies to then refine the product. Chevron stock was down roughly 5% following the announcement of the deal. Tesla's Model 3 was supposed to be the affordable Tesla. It's just $35,000. Affordable is a relative term. This was the vehicle that would make electric vehicles more accessible and more affordable, but it turns out it's not going to really be that accessible after all. Tesla just announced in a blog post that it will no longer offer the Tesla 3 online. You will now have to call Tesla or visit one of their dealerships to order one. Where can you even find those? Oh, and many of the features that would encourage most people to buy a Tesla have been nixed from the Model 3 standard version, including online purchase, we told you about that, but also having any kind of decent range on it and even heated seats. Joining me now to discuss is Lauren Fix, the car coach. Lauren, thanks for being here.
Thank you for having me.
So Tesla seems to continually have missteps, it seems like, especially when it comes to the rollout specifically of Model 3. Why is that?
Well, he made a big promise of offering $35,000 cars, which caused a lot of people to put deposits down, but they never received those vehicles. And now with the removal of the $35,000 car, you can no longer go into the store and purchase it like a tech item, which was the whole concept. Buy it online. Now you're going to have to make a phone call or potentially find a store that's still open because they are having some massive cost cuts. And of course, that also includes cutting of employees and having some other issues as well as lost sales. And there's a lot of interest in the product has waned, especially with the loss of that $7,500 tax credit being cut in half, and by the end of the year, it'll be gone.
Well, obviously, yeah, that's a huge concern. And as you said, now the Model 3 standard was the one that obviously they've kind of reneged on some of this. They're saying they're going to offer maybe a better standard version, but we're looking at the price chart and the stock chart here for Tesla, and just the last few days have been kind of dismal for them, but it's not just been the last few days, right? I mean, this is an ongoing problem that we've seen, especially in the last few months with Tesla, and it seems like announcements that are made and then revoked and then made again. Why is that? Why does it seem like they're in such disarray?
Well, I mean, that's unfortunately, I think that Elon Musk expected when he announced the Model Y that there would be a big boost in stock value, but it didn't. It went the other way because no one got to see inside the vehicle. People that I know were there said that it wasn't really a functioning vehicle. And so when you present something to media especially, they get very excited and want to see it. But when you're sort of not giving them the details, not telling them how to order, sort of keeping everything behind the scenes, plus lost sales and having trouble raising money and bills being due, it sounds like Tesla's running into the same problems that most car manufacturers are running into. Now, he's a smaller manufacturer and he holds his own leasing. That is also causing some financial issues where a dealer has dealer responsibilities and finance laws where they protect consumers. He no longer has that. We never did have it because he's not a dealer network. He's selling himself as a tech company, but he's really a car company. And so I think this is causing a lot of confusion. Consumers aren't that loyal to him. When you got the Audi e-tron, you got the Jaguar I-Pace, you can purchase a Nissan Leaf or a Chevy Bolt EV, all for reasonable prices. And there's a dealer network that will support you, and you'll know they'll be there in 10 years.
Right, and you don't have to go to the mall to find the one Tesla store that might be available in your city. Let's talk about Uber for a second. Shift gears just a little bit. They're getting ready to launch their IPO, but it is, in the filing they put out, it's showing some concerning numbers about the business model. The company said in this filing, for instance, it lost $1.8 billion in 2018, which we'll talk about that in a second, because how do you lose $1.8 billion if you're Uber? Excluding certain transactions, the revenue was, what, $11.3 billion. The other very important takeaway from this, though, is that Uber's growth trajectory, according to this recording, is starting to really slow down. Is this really bad news as they start approaching this IPO?
Yeah, the timing is certainly not good, and neither was it for Lyft when they started off at a high IPO, and now you're watching the stock value dropping quite dramatically. So now when you're looking at Uber, when they do their IPO, timing is going to be everything. You have to remember they've had a few issues. They wanted to get involved in autonomous. They had a death with an autonomous vehicle, and still they've got a lot of competition beyond Lyft and other car companies. And on a global basis, they may be doing okay, but they've got Didi out there, and they're really pushing hard against them. So with the onset of ride sharing and things seem to be going well, and then you have a death like Samantha Josephson here in the U.S., that's a big problem, and it causes a lot of concern for investors. Are they going to invest in a company that may have to make some serious changes and may impact them on the bottom line?
Let's talk about a couple of other quick automotive stories before we go here. Sure. Carlos Ghosn, the former chairman of Nissan Motor Company, is being held in Tokyo on claims of financial misconduct. It was reported today that his detention has been extended by a Tokyo court until at least April 22nd, which, quote, I'm going to quote it here, gives prosecutors extra time to grill him for up to 6 hours a day in a bid to extract a confession, end quote. What is going on with this case?
Well, unfortunately, here's what you can find out if you do a little deep dive into this, and since this is my industry. Carlos Ghosn actually saved Nissan. He partnered in with Renault, which was a debt-free car corporation, and Mitsubishi. And he is the genius upon the success of Nissan. And he was about within 2 weeks of merging Renault and Nissan together so that they would be a more stable corporation. Nissan didn't like that, and the Japanese culture did not want to be partnered with a French car company, so they set him up for this. Now, whether it's true or not, I tend to believe Carlos Ghosn because all the arrows point to the fact that they did anything they could to put a stop to this. They removed him from the board. He was let go as president in all these different locations. His wife has even gone to the country of France asking them to help. The UN has got involved. He was going through some kidney cancer treatment, and they stopped that in order to put him back into prison. I mean, this has gone beyond just a coup when you're potentially hurting someone's health.
Yeah.
So I expect that this is going to have some big outcome, or there's going to be egg on Nissan's face.
Absolutely. Lauren Fix, the car coach, appreciate your time this Friday. Thank you.
Thank you.
And we just want to show you folks real quick, China's vehicle sales, they have fallen for the 9th straight month in March. Total vehicle sales fell to 2.52 million, which is 5.2% down from a year earlier. Bad news for the Chinese automotive industry. If there is any good news, though, for the Chinese here, the China Association of Automotive Manufacturers says that the decline has been significantly reduced. That would be the good news. Thanks for joining us today. That is our report. Be sure to catch Boom Bust on youtube.com/BoomBustRT. We'll see you on Monday.